Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is a wicked little mini bike. Alright, today we're going to be visiting the Save-A-196 Foundation. We're going to take a closer look at this little engine that we're going to be placing in the wicked little mini bike. I actually built this engine a few months back, and this one is a BSP block from OMB Warehouse. There is no oil sensor or governor to deal with. This one has a genuine Honda 14cc GX160 head and some other things going on. We're just going to take it apart and go over it as we do so. First thing, all the sheet metal, including the valve cover. Speaking of valve cover, that is issue number 1. There's some extra honey down in that pot. We're building up a lot of pressure up here in the head. This one does have a drilled out galley hole. Obviously you can't see it with the head on there, but we'll get to that. Here's something else we can do to this to help it out a little bit and try to alleviate that problem altogether. While we're here, Champion rockers. You can see some billet retainers under there. This has the NR Racing stainless steel package. This is a small valve, 22-pound springs. These are just your standard non-Hemi stainless steel push rods. We're staying on the skinny side with the head gasket, and that is because we're running a stock length billet rod with the Honda flat top piston and rings. We have just a little bit of something to the top of the deck. I have another one of these outside drying. I just hit it with a little bit of that copper spray, just for good measure. Grab my rods. I'm going to pull this coil wire. We're going to be replacing that, and I'll just tidy up a little bit. You can see I got a little red Loctite up there. I'll work that out with a pick and try my best not to get it down here. There's the galley hole down in the middle, and well, you can sort of see it. Looks like a little pool of oil in front of it. Just a quick spritz of super clean on a paper towel. Got all of that off there. Now I'm going to quench the face of the piston, the cylinder wall, with oil. Lower it down just a little bit. See what I'm saying? There's a clean rag with fresh oil. And all that junk is coming out with it. I'll repeat that 3 more times. Before we attempt to put the head back on, we're going to be swapping out the crankcase cover itself. I have another one over here that I already fitted a barb on, and it has good bearing, a recent seal. It's ready to go. It would behoove us to empty the engine oil at this point. Then I'll get that sucker off of there. I have things propped up at a little bit of an angle. That way the cam doesn't fall out. Currently we have a Dynocam's CS cam installed. I also have a CM Super X on the side. We're going to roll with this one for now. Billet rod. There was no governor ever. There's where the oil sensor usually is. You can see that they don't bore them out on these castings. I have my side cover all cleaned up, my bearing thoroughly cleaned out. I'm only doing that because this was sitting in the bottom of a box. Who knows what could have got into the mix. Cleaned it out thoroughly. I'm now going to grab a little bit of engine oil and let that bad boy marinate. Still spins real good. Fresh gasket out of our set, and we are going to be attaching the side cover with the stock 10mm bolts. I didn't have an issue with it blowing out the side cover gasket or these bolts loosening and having leakage on this side of the engine. Everything was that away. So at this point I can put this back on, and I'll use just a couple drops of red Loctite on the ends of these bolts, and then I'll torque them on at 19 foot-pounds. With our bottom end all sealed up, we are now ready to reinstall the head. This time around, we're going to be using one of these Mondo stud sets. You just take your nut and thread it on to the stud, and then hand tighten the stud into the block. Once it stops, we're almost there. Getting closer. Alright. Give it a good twist, nice and firm, and then back your nut off. Do that to all 4 of them. Very carefully, I'm lowering my gasket onto my studs. I just gave my mating surface for the gasket on the head a quick wipe down with a brand new rag, and a little bit of lacquer thinner. That way we can ensure the best seal we can when we lower it down on our copper covered gasket. I'm going to let that dry off completely. It's not going to take long. And then you know where it's going. Once the nuts go on, you juggle around from nut to nut, going a little bit tighter each time, working up to 20 foot-pounds. To install my push rods, I just removed the two 10mm nuts from my shaft mounted Champion rockers. I'm now going to place these back on, and I will be torquing them at 94 inch-pounds. Remove the spark plug, and I'm going to lash the valves. It's summer, it's hot out, this engine is going to run hot. I'm lashing at 0.0015. If I can get it in here, you'll be able to see. Okay. Our exhaust, I hug it. On the intake, we just kiss it. Mwah. The NGKR spark plug that was in here isn't looking too awful bad, so we're going to reuse it. However, it needs to be indexed. When this is completely tight, the electrode is facing upward like that, so the spark is up here. We want our spark to be down in between our valves in the middle of the chamber. If it's a little bit towards the intake, that's not going to kill us. At the same time, I'm going to cut my electrode back just a hair and then re-gap it. That's all you're looking for. Something like that. I just made a mark so that we could reference where the smart end of the electrode is. So far, I've cut off the stock washer from the spark plug and commenced to filing down two copper washers. I'm very, very close. Word to the wise. When you do this, it is a lot easier if you start with a spark plug that comes pretty close to indexed in the first place. I totally forgot that step, but for the love of mini bikes, we're in it to win it. Filing we go. I know I said it was okay to favor the intake, but if you look at where the port is, that's almost directly at the intake valve. So what I'm doing is taking a little bit off of each washer. When you do that, a little bit more thread goes in, and then it brings your electrode down and into position. I'll take a little more off of each one, and I think I'll call it good. Yeah, that's perfect. This is time consuming, but it's worth it, believe me, especially when it comes to things like carb tuning. This can be just as important as timing. The next part is going to be connecting the spark plug back to the coil. We're going to need new wire for that, and a boot. I'm using an XL universal spark plug wire replacement kit. You can get a few of these short coil wires just out of one of these. Comes with numerous boots. I've selected this one as well as one of these simple terminals. These are silicone based instead of copper. You just expose the inside, bend it over, and then crimp your terminal over it. Make sure that the wire sits on the closed end. I'll get it in there and show you. These guys actually make their own crimper and cutter for this. I might try it at some point. I didn't do too bad with my basic wire kit crimping tool, but hey, she's more than a stripper. She's your best friend in a pinch. This might even be some sort of a lube that this kit came with. We didn't need that. We went all natural. No problem. This end is going to go on the spark plug, and the other end of the wire is going to go down into the coil. We're going to figure out our desired length, pull this end off, and use pliers to twist the wire down onto that pin that you see in there. That is threaded, and that will make its way up into the silicone sleeve and into the inside portion where the wire's at. I just slid the stock boot that went onto the coil itself onto the new wire before placing it in. What I mean by pliers is I take my fingers first, I push down, and I twist it as far in as I can. I then get a nice sure grip on it, but not too tight. We don't want to tear this material. Try not to even mark it up if you can. Push down firmly and evenly, and I just give it a good to seat it on that pin. Here it is, installed. I left this one just a little bit long. I usually do them nice and short, but I'm going to see if this makes a difference. It's kind of nice to be able to bend this wire up out of the way, depending on what else you have going on at the valve cover and your intake manifold. I have my sheet metal on. Now we're going to be modifying the valve cover. We're also going to find somewhere to attach this hose. We might even make it a little bit longer. We'll see. The first part of creating our high performance valve cover and ventilation system is going to be adding a custom Pcv valve. This modification comes from Zach's Pro Mod. We're going to start by removing the stock baffle that's inside of your valve cover. I just used a flathead screwdriver. This one has a little bend on the end, probably from trying to pry something. However, that works really well with getting under the lip of that baffle. I just hold it up, use a hammer, a couple taps, and a pry. It's out of there. The next step is to tap the old hole that's there. You can see I already have a few threads on there. That's done with a 1/4 inch 18 NPT. This is just a 3/8 barb, 1/4 inch NPT. That is going to go in here. I like to leave just a couple of my threads exposed. This NPT is a tapered thread, so this is extremely tight. Just to make sure, I'm going to fill those last couple threads with a little bit of steel weld. It's just like JB. While that's curing up, we're going to move on to the Pcv valve itself. We're going to make something of an adapter. Reason being, this thing flows one way. That's that way. Our hose needs to attach to this end. This is a 5/8 fitting. So, we're going to need a little piece of 5/8 hose. I think this is just like some heater hose. Our main line that comes off of the barb is a 3/8 inside diameter. It's just some braided hose. We're 5/8 on our valve. We need to transfer from here to here to here. We're going to use a 3/8 barb and a short piece of 3/8 ID 1/2 inch outside diameter clear vinyl tubing. The splicer goes into the end of the braided line. We then add one clamp. The Pcv valve goes into one end of the 5/8 inside diameter hose. And then one more clamp. I cut about 2 inches of that black hose off. I only need about 1.5 inches. I'll save this for another one. I'm just feeding the clear vinyl tube into the end of the shortened black hose. It's going to bottom out when it hits the 5/8 section of the valve. Once it bottoms out, I'm going to cut the clear tubing flush with the black hose. Now that we have something like this, we're going to slide a third clamp over the hose. Then we can stick the barb into the tubing and tighten that clamp. We're getting there now. I have the other end in my hand. If I blow out, air passes. If we pull in, it closes. We're airtight. We're going to be attaching one of these filters directly to the end of our Pcv valve. If we stick it on there by itself, you can see it's not very snug. I'm going to use a piece of this again. I'm going to feed a section in so that it dangles about mid-filter. You know what I mean? And then I cut it off flush back here again, slide it on, and I'll clamperino. Small piece of the clear tubing. Take that filter, bottom it out where it would be against the valve, and we can see how far we are off of the face over here. We don't want to be stuck up against that where we will be creating a vacuum. So I'm going to take about another 1/8 off of that, slide the filter on, hit it with the clamp. Yeah, buddy. I find it's easiest to pre-assemble my valve cover and my valve cover extension to resemble something of a gasket sandwich. You can see my bolts are sticking through. Nothing's going to just fall apart. Now I can control it with this hand and begin to work the threads with my other. I'm going to need 2 hands and a wrench. For right now, I'm just holding this wrench with a fist and twisting it as hard as I can. Once I know everything's a go, I'll back these out individually and add something like this to the threads, reinsert it, and give her the beans. The OMB Warehouse billet valve cover extension comes with 2 options. It has a threaded hole on the top of it that can receive a plug or a barb. I believe this is a 1/4 inch. I know that it goes inside of here. So I'm just going to back this out. I'm going to dope my threads up. A little bit of that. And I'll get my barb set. Then we'll see if our hose is long enough. I'm all tight. take the hose and we'll check next to the barb. That'll work. I'll throw a clamp on there, feed it on, do its thing. The last thing we do is attach our 3/8 braided hose with our new Pcv valve to the 3/8 barb. This may get cut shorter. It depends where it gets attached to the frame. The idea is that the hose stays up and eventually gravity will bring any oil that gets out back down underneath the valve cover. When it's on top of the valves, it can go back down through our galley hole that we bored out, back down into the block. We're then relieving pressure from our block back to the top of the head again. One big circulation and everything serves a purpose. Looking cool? Well, that's just a bonus. This next part is super easy. I'm going to install a Wildcat WC22 26mm round slide carburetor and a very simple yet effective linkage. The first thing I'm putting on is one of these EC carburetors short billet adapters. 2 bolts. That's it. I'm going to trim this gasket a little bit and then install the carburetor. I have my studs set up so that they have a nylock nut already on them. You just line it up and you can see you can pass by with your wrench and tighten them in. Once the studs are all the way in the holes here and you're tight with this, you then turn the nylock nut slightly with a 10mm. It locks it in place. All installed. I'm cutting it a little close, but we are going to be routing this hose up and attaching it to the frame after all. That's going to pull it up something like that. Our throttle cable is going to come over through here. We'll look at that next. We'll be able to reach around and access this choke pretty easily. So once this is up and out of the way, it'll be right next to the carburetor. This is going to be out in the open, so things to come, guys. Next, we're going to add a linkage. We're going to be installing one of these OMB Mikuni linkages. You need 2 places to mount it. I get these little clips down at the hardware store. I trim them down, and what they are is something of an insert. You place it over something with a hole so that the bolt can pass through, and it pinches and locks itself when it's fully tightened. We have a hole that lines up on the fan shroud and the recoil starter. So when we put this clip on over the recoil starter, it'll go between the 2 metal parts sandwiched right in there. Our bolt will go through, thread in, and it'll continue into that hole. That will affix the linkage to the recoil starter. The recoil starter is going to be attached by 3 bolts itself. The other end of the linkage is going to be right here. That thing isn't going anywhere. Yeah, I know. I could have used a fresh cable, but this is my lucky linkage. So I'm keeping it. Once this hose is up, you see, we're not even going to be making contact. This is going to go like up and across, so it'll pull away. And then we have plenty of room with the spark plug. We can pull our boot and work around things there. Nothing in the way here. We're not running a top plate right now. We're going to need a filter and something to cover up this hole here. That'd be the exhaust. I have a freshly oiled filter. We'll let that sit there and simmer. We're not going to be running this thing probably for a day or two anyway, so plenty of time. I'm going to be running this crossover style header. Very simple by design. Comes back, gets out of the way, comes outside of the frame. We can run a straight pipe, trumpet, or a mini 91. This would be quiet things down a little bit, but still keep it popping. I have some header wrap right here. I'm going to throw that in a bucket of water and let it soak. I'm going to leave this trumpet on there for now, and I'm going to use this for my starting point on my wrap. I'll work from there to there, and I'll show you a bit of that process too, since it's basically the last thing we're going to touch on today. We are going hard on the clamps today, but 2 more. These ones are going to go here, and we're going to try for down here, but we have to make sure they're not in the way of our nuts going onto our studs. So we'll see how far we get with the piece we have. I have it sitting outside in the bucket. In my opinion, the trickiest part is getting this started. You can't have the clamp closed. You have to start on the pipe. Start wrapping, and once you get your first good wrap, maybe 2, and you have your tail hanging out, you put one of these over and you tighten it real good. With the clamp secured, we can now wrap this as tight as we want. We're going to go until I run out, or I get somewhere that I feel is a good place to cut it off, and I'll add my second clamp. Here's what I ended up with. I just kept my clamps all facing the same direction. They're easy to get to right where they're at, and they're kind of tucked away. when this thing is mounted. That one will be on the outside so that we can adjust it if we have to. We also might add some header support down here. It's black. It's sunny out. I'm gonna go let this thing bake. With my header drying out a bit, just gonna add 16 ounces of oil. Oh yeah, that'll do. Up next, we're gonna install this thing on the mini bike, and then we're gonna fire it up. Because as always, it's a work in progress. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.